The stars do not care. This is the first truth every spacefaring species must learn, and it is a truth that breaks many of them before they ever leave their birth worlds. The void between galaxies stretches cold and infinite, indifferent to the rise and fall of civilizations, to the wars that consume entire star systems, to the desperate prayers whispered in languages that will one day be forgotten.
The stars were burning long before the first sentient creature looked up and wondered, and they will burn long after the last monument crumbles to dust. I have lived for 937 standard cycles. By human reckoning, that would be nearly 1,200 of their years. I have witnessed the birth of new species into the galactic community and mourned the quiet extinction of others. I have stood in the halls of the Concord when treaties were signed that brought peace to 100 worlds, and I have watched from orbit as planets burned beneath the fury of wars I could not prevent.
My name is Vathar Solen, and I was, first chronicler of the Athrani Dominion. I say was because the Dominion as I knew it no longer exists. The great fleet that once patrolled the Spiral Arm, 7,000 vessels strong, has been reduced to scattered remnants fleeing through the dark between stars. The Council of Eternal Voices, which governed our people for 16,000 years with wisdom accumulated across 100 generations, fell silent in a single night when the hollowing reached our throne world. But I am getting ahead of myself. That is the danger of age, I think, the temptation to speak of endings before the listener understands the beginning. Let me tell you instead about the day I first saw humanity. It was an unremarkable moment in what had been an unremarkable century. The Dominion was strong, our borders secure, our fleets unopposed. We had achieved what we believed to be the natural state of an advanced civilization: stability, permanence, the quiet confidence of a people who had long ago solved the problems that plagued younger races. We looked upon the galaxy not with hunger or fear, but with the benevolent patience of elders watching children take their first uncertain steps. The human delegation arrived at Station Verith 7 in a vessel that made our diplomats laugh. Not openly, of course. The Athrani pride ourselves on courtesy, but I saw the subtle shifts in their crests, the almost imperceptible fluttering of secondary eyelids that betrayed amusement. The human ship was small, perhaps 1/10 the size of our smallest courier. Its hull was scarred and patched, clearly a vessel that had been repaired many times rather than replaced. The design was utilitarian to the point of ugliness, all hard angles and exposed systems, with none of the flowing aesthetic that we considered the mark of a civilized species. They build like engineers, Ambassador Catherine observed, and in his mouth the word engineers carried a note of condescension. Among the Athrani, engineers were respected for their utility, but it was artists and philosophers who held true status. A species that could not imagine beauty beyond function was, by our measure, still primitive. The humans who emerged from that battered vessel did nothing to change our impression. There were 3 of them, 2 males and 1 female by their biology, dressed in simple gray uniforms with no ornamentation beyond small patches on their shoulders. They moved with an odd economy of motion, nothing wasted, nothing elaborate. They did not bow as deeply as protocol suggested, nor did they offer the elaborate verbal flourishes that typically preceded diplomatic exchanges. The female stepped forward. She was young by their standards, perhaps 30 of their years, with dark hair pulled back from a face that seemed designed for stillness. I remember thinking that she looked tired, not exhausted but weary in a deeper sense, as if she had been tired for a very long time and had simply learned to carry the weight.
"I am Commander Sarah Chen," she said. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." That was all. No recitation of ancestry, no invocation of historical bonds, no flowery expressions of honor at being received. Just a name, a rank, and gratitude expressed in the simplest possible terms.
Ambassador Catherine's crest fluttered again. "You are welcome," he replied, and I could hear his uncertainty. He had prepared hours of ceremonial response and now found himself with nothing to attach it to. "The Ethrani Dominion receives the representatives of humanity with the grace befitting our ancient traditions." "That's very kind," Commander Chen said. And then she waited. The silence stretched. Among the Ethrani, such silences were filled with meaning, a chance for both parties to demonstrate their patience, their refinement, their understanding of the subtle dance of diplomacy. But there was something different about the way the human waited. It was not performance, it was not strategy. She simply waited, as if she had nowhere else to be and nothing to prove. I found it unsettling, though I could not have explained why. The negotiations that followed were brief and, from our perspective, somewhat disappointing. Humanity was requesting trade access to our outer systems, a modest request given their limited capabilities. They had little to offer in return except raw materials from their home system and labor contracts for their workers. Catherine granted their request with barely concealed indifference, viewing the arrangement as charitable rather than equitable. "They will not last long," he told me afterward, as we watched their vessel undock and begin its slow journey back to the transit point. "They have expanded too quickly, claimed more than they can hold. Within a century, they will either be absorbed by a larger power or collapse into internal conflict. It is the way of young species." I recorded his assessment in the Chronicle, as was my duty. I noted the date, the terms of the agreement, the composition of the human delegation. I described their ship, their clothing, their manner of speech, and then I added a single observation of my own, which I had no logical reason to include. The human commander watched us with eyes that revealed nothing. I do not know what she saw. I do not know what she thought. This uncertainty troubles me. That was 400 years ago. For most of that time, I did not think of humanity at all. They existed at the edges of our awareness, a minor species with a handful of colonies and a small fleet that posed no threat to anyone. Occasionally, a report would cross my desk. A human freighter had been attacked by raiders. A human colony had suffered a natural disaster. A human diplomat had said something mildly controversial at a Concord assembly. Small news, insignificant news. There were troubles, of course. Humanity seemed to attract trouble the way some species attracted parasites. They fought a war with the Chthoni hegemony in their second century of expansion, a war everyone expected them to lose. They did not lose. They fought another war a century later with the Vortal Imperium, a conflict that should have ended in their extinction. It did not. Each time we noted their survival with mild surprise and then moved on to more pressing matters. Stubborn, Catherine called them in one of our later conversations. Like vermin. You think you've driven them out, but they always come back. I did not argue with him, though something about his comparison troubled me. Vermin survived through breeding and hiding. That was not quite what humanity did. They survived, yes, but there was something deliberate about it, something almost strategic, as if survival itself was a skill they had practiced until they had mastered it. But these were idle thoughts, the kind of musings that filled the empty hours of an old chronicler's life.
I had more immediate concerns. The hollowing had begun. We did not call it that at first. In the beginning, it was simply a mystery. A few ships disappearing in the outer reaches, a colony going silent, a patrol failing to report. Such things happened occasionally in a galaxy as vast as ours. We investigated, found nothing, and moved on. Then the disappearances became too frequent to ignore.
Entire fleets vanished without a trace. Stations that had stood for millennia went dark overnight. Worlds that had housed billions of our people simply stopped transmitting. When we sent ships to investigate, they did not return. When we sent larger forces, they too were swallowed by the silence.
The enemy, for by now we knew it was an enemy, though we did not understand its nature, never revealed itself. There were no demands, no communications, no attempts at negotiation. There was only the slow, inexorable advance of nothing. The hollowing ate our territory one system at a time, and we could do nothing to stop it. In the council of eternal voices, panic gave way to denial, and denial to paralysis. Our leaders, who had governed wisely for 16,000 years, found themselves facing something that wisdom could not address. They debated and deliberated while the hollowing advanced. They formed committees and commissioned studies while our fleets burned in the dark. I watched it all from my position as chronicler, recording the collapse of everything I had known with the same clinical precision I had brought to recording peace treaties and trade agreements. It was the only way I could endure it. If I allowed myself to feel what was happening, I would not be able to continue. By the time the Council finally accepted the truth that we were facing extinction, we had lost nearly half our territory. 3,000 years of expansion erased in less than a decade. Billions of Athrani dead or vanished, their fates unknown, and the hollowing showed no signs of slowing.
It was Kethran who first suggested reaching out to humanity.
He was old now, even by our standards, over 2,000 cycles. His crest faded to the pale blue that marked the final stage of life. The arrogance I remembered from our first meeting had been worn away by centuries of loss. He no longer laughed at the younger species. He no longer laughed at all. "They survived," he said when the council questioned his proposal. "We have dismissed them for centuries, called them primitive, said they would not last, and yet they are still here. Perhaps," he hesitated, as if the words cost him something, "perhaps they know something we do not." The council deliberated for 3 days. Pride warred with desperation. The idea of asking humans for help was almost unthinkable. We were the Athrani. We had walked among the stars when humanity was still learning to use fire. We had built civilizations that spanned the galaxy while they fought with sharpened sticks. But the hollowing did not care about our pride. It continued to advance, and our fleets continued to vanish. And in the end, the council voted to send a delegation. They chose me. Perhaps they thought my position as chronicler gave me some special insight. Perhaps they simply wanted to send someone expendable. I did not ask. I accepted the assignment, gathered what remained of my household, and boarded one of the few ships we had left. The journey to human space took 3 weeks. In that time, I tried to prepare myself for what I would find. I reviewed everything in the Chronicle about humanity, their history, their culture, their technology, their wars. I studied recordings of their leaders, listened to translations of their literature, analyzed reports from our observers. None of it prepared me for Earth. The planet itself was unremarkable, smaller than our homeworld, with a thinner atmosphere and a single oversized moon. The cities sprawled across its surface in patterns that seemed chaotic to my eyes, lacking the careful geometric order of Athrani architecture. The orbital stations were functional but unadorned, and the ships that moved between them had the same utilitarian ugliness I remembered from 4 centuries ago.
But there were so many of them.
When I had first encountered humanity, their fleet had numbered in the hundreds. Now, as I looked out at the space around their homeworld, I could not begin to count the vessels that filled the void. They moved in patterns that suggested coordination, but not the rigid formations of military fleets. They moved like a single organism, each ship aware of its place in a larger whole.
Ambassador Vathar. The voice came through our communication system, calm and unhurried. Welcome to Sol System. Please proceed to Station Unity for diplomatic processing. A guide will meet you there. I acknowledged the instruction and watched as my pilot navigated toward the designated station. It was larger than I expected, perhaps 3 times the size of our largest orbital facilities, but it had the same unassuming aesthetic as everything else human. Gray metal, minimal decoration, systems exposed for easy maintenance. It was a station built by people who cared more about function than appearance.
The guide who met us at the docking bay was a young man with dark skin and eyes that seemed too old for his face. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb and apologized for the informal reception.
The Admiral would have met you personally, he said, but we're in the middle of a fleet mobilization. I'm sure you understand. I did not understand, but I nodded as if I did. A mobilization? Are you expecting an attack? Webb's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Not expecting, he said. Preparing.
He led us through corridors that bustled with activity, humans moving with purpose, carrying equipment, conferring in small groups. There was an energy to them that I found disconcerting. The Athrani moved through our spaces with deliberate grace, conserving energy, demonstrating our mastery of our environment. The humans moved like they were racing against time they could not afford to lose.
Forgive my curiosity, I said as we walked, but you mentioned a fleet mobilization. How large is your fleet now? Webb glanced at me and I saw something that might have been amusement. Or pity. Which one? I'm sorry? We have 12 regional fleets, he said, as if this were common knowledge. Each one operates independently, with its own command structure and logistics network. Then there's the home fleet, the expeditionary fleet, the reserve fleet, and the auxiliary fleet. All told, we have somewhere around 47,000 combat-capable vessels, plus another 120,000 support ships. I stopped walking. I could not help it. The number was impossible. When I had last checked the Chronicle's records on humanity, their fleet had been smaller than our patrol force, perhaps 800 ships. The idea that they could have grown to nearly 200,000 vessels in 4 centuries was...
That cannot be correct, I said.
Webb stopped as well, turning to face me. His expression was patient, understanding. It is. But how? Your population, your resources, your industrial capacity, the mathematics simply do not support. Ambassador, Webb's voice was gentle but firm. With respect, your people have been calculating our potential based on models that don't apply to us. You see our small territory, our limited resources, and you assume we're constrained by them. We're not. Then what constrains you? He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. Need, he said. We build what we need when we need it. For a long time, we didn't need much. We were happy to trade, to explore, to grow slowly and carefully. We didn't want to frighten anyone. We didn't want to become what we could become. He started walking again, and I followed, my mind reeling. And now? Now, Webb said, we've received reports of something hunting in the outer reaches, something that makes fleets disappear, something that silences worlds. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something hard in his eyes, something cold. Now we need more. The meeting with Admiral Chen, granddaughter of Commander Sarah Chen, I would later learn, took place in a room that was barely larger than my personal quarters aboard our ship. There was a table, a few chairs, a screen on one wall, and nothing else. The Admiral herself was a small woman with gray-streaked hair and a face that reminded me powerfully of her grandmother. She had the same stillness, the same economy of movement, the same eyes that revealed nothing. "Ambassador Vathar," she said, rising to shake my hand in the human fashion. "Thank you for coming such a long way. Please, sit." I sat. She sat across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "You know why I'm here," I finally said. Yes, she did not elaborate. "The Aetherine Dominion is facing an existential threat. We have lost half our territory, billions of our people, and we cannot seem to stop the advance. Our fleets are no match for whatever this enemy is. We need help." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "I've read the reports. I'm sorry for your losses." There was something in her voice that caught me off guard, a note of genuine sympathy that I had not expected. I had prepared for human gloating, for pointed reminders of how we had dismissed them for centuries. Instead, I found only understanding. "You're wondering why we're not rubbing it in," Chen said, reading my expression with unsettling accuracy. "Why we're not pointing out that the great Aetherine Dominion has come crawling to the primitives for help." The thought had occurred to me. She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "We know what it's like to face extinction, Ambassador. We know what it's like to lose everything, to watch your people die while you search desperately for some way to save them. We don't take joy in seeing it happen to others, even those who once looked down on us." I felt something then that I had not expected. Shame. Deep, burning shame. Not for my people's arrogance, though that was part of it, but for my own. I had spent 4 centuries thinking of humanity as a footnote, a minor species unworthy of serious attention, and now they were looking at me with compassion I had never bothered to extend to them. "I don't understand you," I admitted. "Your species has every reason to resent us, to let us suffer, and yet—" "And yet we're going to help you anyway," Chen finished. "Yes." "Why?" She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. "Do you know much about human history, Ambassador?" "I have studied the Chronicles records." "Then, we spent most of our existence fighting each other. Wars over territory, over resources, over ideology. We were very good at killing ourselves. We came close to extinction more than once, through war, through disease, through environmental collapse. Every time we found a way to survive, but the cost was enormous." She leaned forward, her eyes focusing on mine. "When we finally reached the stars, we thought things would be different. We thought that if we could just get off our one fragile world, we would finally be safe. And then we met the galaxy, and we learned that the universe was full of civilizations that saw us as prey or vermin or simply obstacles to be removed. We fought wars for survival against enemies that should have crushed us. We lost billions of people. We watched colonies burn. And we survived." "So you understand our situation?" I said.
I understand it intimately. Chen stood and walked to the window, a real window, I realized, not a screen. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant. But I also understand something else, something that took us a very long time to learn. Survival alone is not enough. If all you do is survive, you become something hollow, something that has forgotten why life is worth living in the first place.
She turned back to face me. We help you because helping is part of who we are, or at least who we've chosen to become. We spent too many centuries letting our fears turn us into monsters. We're not going to let that happen again, not even when it would be easy, not even when it would be justified.
I sat in silence, processing her words. They were not what I had expected. Nothing about humanity was what I had expected.
"Tell me about the enemy," Chen said, returning to her seat. "Tell me everything you know."
So I told her. I spoke for hours, describing the hollowing in every detail I could recall. The pattern of attacks, the way ships and stations simply vanished, the utter silence that followed. I shared intelligence reports, sensor readings, the scattered testimony of the few survivors we had managed to rescue. I held nothing back, exposing the full extent of our vulnerability to a species we had once dismissed as primitive.
Chen listened without interruption, her face betraying nothing. Occasionally, she would glance at a tablet on the table, making notes or checking information. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "We've seen this before," she said at last. I felt my heart skip. "You've encountered the hollowing?" "Not by that name. We call them the Silence." She stood again, walking to the screen on the wall. It came to life at her touch, displaying a star map. "They appeared at the edge of our territory about 40 years ago, attacked 3 of our outer colonies before we could mount a defense."
I stared at the map, at the human systems marked in blue. "But your colonies are intact. Your fleets are mobilizing, not fleeing. How did you stop them?"
"We didn't." Chen zoomed the map to show a region of space marked in red. "We pushed them back, contained them. It took us 15 years, cost us nearly 1,000 ships, but we established a perimeter they can't cross. Every time they probe our defenses, we respond with overwhelming force. They've learned to leave us alone."
"That's not possible," I said, and I heard the desperation in my own voice. "Our fleets are larger than yours, or they were. Our technology is more advanced. If you could stop them, why couldn't we?" Chen turned from the screen, her expression unreadable. "Can I be honest with you, Ambassador?"
"Please."
"Your fleets were larger. Your technology was in some ways more advanced, but you fought the way you've always fought, with caution, with deliberation, with a focus on minimizing losses. You treated this as a war to be managed, not a fight for survival."
"And you fought differently?"
"We fought like cornered animals." There was no pride in her voice, only a grim acknowledgement of truth. "When the Silence came for us, we didn't hold back. We didn't worry about proportional response or acceptable casualties. We threw everything we had at them. And when that wasn't enough, we built more and threw that too. We burned worlds to deny them resources. We sacrificed ships by the dozen to learn their weaknesses. We did things that still haunt me in my nightmares." She walked back to the table, sat down heavily. "Your people have the strength to defeat the hollowing, Ambassador. You have the ships, the technology, the intelligence. What you lack is the willingness to use it without restraint. You're still thinking like a civilization. We learned to think like survivors." I sat in silence, absorbing her words. She was right. I knew she was right. The Aethrani had always fought with one eye on the future, on maintaining the structures and institutions that had served us for millennia.
We preserved even as we defended, and it was killing us.
Will you help us? I asked again. Not with advice, with action. Will you send your fleets to fight alongside ours?
Chen was quiet for a long moment. I need to consult with my government, she said finally, with the other species who have treaties with us. This is not a decision I can make alone.
How long?
3 days, maybe 4.
I nodded, though my hearts ached at the delay. 3 days while the hollowing continued to advance. 3 days while more of my people vanished into the void.
In the meantime, Chen continued, I'd like you to stay here. Not as a prisoner, you're free to leave whenever you wish, but I think it would be valuable for you to see how we operate, to understand why we fight the way we do. She paused, a hint of something unreadable in her eyes. And perhaps, Ambassador, to help your people understand something about humanity that the Chronicle may have missed.
Over the next 3 days, I was given unprecedented access to human military operations. Lieutenant Commander Webb served as my guide, taking me to shipyards and training facilities, command centers and logistics hubs. Everywhere we went, I saw the same thing: focused, purposeful activity on a scale that staggered my imagination. At the Olympus Mons shipyard, I watched as vessels were constructed in a matter of days rather than the months our facilities required. The production lines ran constantly, 3 shifts of workers operating in perfect coordination. When I asked how they maintained such a pace, Webb smiled. "We don't sleep much during a mobilization."
That's not healthy, I observed.
No, he agreed. It's not.
At the Fleet Academy, I observed human officers training for combat scenarios. Their drills were brutal, unforgiving, designed not just to teach tactics, but to break down the fear that could paralyze a crew in battle. They need to be comfortable with the idea of dying, the Academy's commandant explained to me, not eager for it, but not afraid of it either. Fear is the enemy in any fight. If we can teach them to master it, they can fight anything.
And if they can't master it?
Then they're assigned to support roles. There's no shame in it. Not everyone is built for combat, and we don't pretend otherwise.
At a medical facility, I saw the wounded from previous battles, humans missing limbs, bearing scars, their bodies rebuilt with mechanical enhancements. They spoke of their experiences without self-pity, describing horrors that would have broken most Athrony. One woman, who had lost both legs in an engagement with the Silence, was undergoing rehabilitation to return to active duty.
"Why?" I asked her. "You've given enough. Why not accept a pension, live in comfort?" She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Because my ship is still out there. My crew is still fighting, and as long as they're in danger, I can't rest. I won't rest." It was in that moment, I think, that I began to truly understand humanity. They were not motivated by pride or ambition, not by the desire for glory or conquest. They fought because they had no choice, because the alternative was to abandon the people they loved to face the darkness alone. Each human soldier I met carried that same weight, the knowledge that somewhere, someone depended on them, and that failure meant betraying that trust. We Athrani fought for the Dominion, for the abstract concept of our civilization. Humans fought for each other. On the 3rd day, Webb took me to a place he called the Wall of Remembrance. It was a vast hall, its walls covered with names, millions of names, stretching from floor to ceiling, carved in simple letters. "Every human who has died in defense of others," Webb explained. "Soldiers, rescue workers, volunteers who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. We add new names every year. The wall
grows.
I stood before that wall for a long time, reading names I could not pronounce, honoring the dead I had never known. There was a weight to this place, a solemnity that transcended language and species. These were not just casualties of war. They were individuals who had chosen to stand between danger and those they loved, and had paid the ultimate price.
In the Chronicle, I said softly, we record the deaths of the great, the leaders, the heroes, the ones who changed the course of history. But we do not have this. We do not honor the ordinary.
There's nothing ordinary about sacrifice, Webb replied. Every name on this wall represents a choice, a moment when someone decided that something was more important than their own survival. That's worth remembering. That's worth honoring, regardless of rank or status.
I thought of the billions of Athrani who had died in the Hollowing, their names unrecorded, their sacrifices unacknowledged. We had mourned them as a number, a statistic, a measure of our civilization's decline. We had not honored them as individuals.
Perhaps that, too, was something we had gotten wrong. On the fourth day, Admiral Chen summoned me to her office. The room was unchanged from my first visit, the same simple table, the same few chairs, the same window looking out at the stars. But Chen herself seemed different. There was an energy to her that I had not seen before, a barely contained intensity that made the air feel charged. "The decision has been made," she said without preamble. "We're going to help you." I felt my heart surge with relief. "Thank you. I cannot express." "Don't thank me yet," she held up a hand. "There are conditions." "Of course, whatever you require." "First, you will not interfere with our operational decisions. When our fleets engage the Hollowing, they will do so under human command. Your ships can support us, but they will follow our orders."
It was a humiliating condition, stripping the Athrani of command in our own territory. I swallowed my pride and nodded. Agreed.
"Second, you will grant us full access to your sensor data, your intelligence reports, everything you know about the enemy. No holding back, no edited versions, everything." "Agreed." "Third," she paused, and something softened in her expression. "Third, you will tell your people the truth about us, about what we're capable of, about why we've hidden our strength for so long. When this is over, there will be no more dismissing humanity as primitive or insignificant. We're tired of pretending to be less than we are." I looked at her, at this woman who commanded fleets that dwarfed anything in the known galaxy, who spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to prove herself, and I understood, finally, what humanity had been doing for the past 4 centuries. They had been waiting, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but out of choice. They had built their strength in secret, hidden their true capabilities behind a mask of mediocrity, allowed the galaxy to underestimate them because the alternative was to inspire fear and hostility. They had endured the condescension of ancient civilizations, the mockery of species who saw them as vermin, the dismissal of empires who thought they would never amount to anything. And now, when the galaxy needed them most, they were ready. "I will tell them," I said. "I will add it to the Chronicle so that all Athrani will know the truth. Humanity is not what we believed. Humanity is what we failed to see."
Chen nodded, and for the first time I saw something like satisfaction in her eyes. Then let's get to work.
The mobilization of the human fleet was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Within hours of Chen's decision, orders went out across human space.
Ships that had been in dock for maintenance launched half-repaired. Reserve units activated and moved to rally points. Civilian vessels were converted to military use with startling efficiency, their crews replaced by naval personnel who had been training for exactly this scenario. But it was not just the military that mobilized. Across the human worlds, factories shifted production to war materials. Research facilities redirected their efforts to weapons development. Hospitals prepared for mass casualties. Schools taught children what to do if the enemy reached their systems. An entire civilization, 100 billion people, transformed itself into a single instrument of war.
How is this possible? I asked Webb as we watched the feeds from a dozen different systems. How can you coordinate so many people, so many resources so quickly?
Practice, he said simply. We've done this before. Not at this scale, but the mechanisms are the same. Every human knows their role in a mobilization. Every community has a plan. Every resource has been cataloged and allocated. When the order comes, we don't need to figure out what to do. We just do it.
I thought of the Athrani response to the hollowing, the endless debates, the bureaucratic delays, the leaders who could not agree on what needed to be done. We had 16,000 years of wisdom, and it had paralyzed us.
Humanity had 4 centuries of desperation, and it had made them unbreakable.
The human fleet departed for Athrani space 3 weeks after my arrival. I traveled with them aboard the flagship, a vessel named Defiance that was larger than any ship I had ever seen. It carried a crew of 12,000 and enough firepower to level a planet. And it was just one of nearly 20,000 ships in the main battle group. As we entered the transit point that would take us to my homeland, I stood at the observation deck and looked out at the fleet arrayed around us. The ships stretched in every direction, an endless armada that blocked out the stars. Navigation lights blinked in synchronized patterns, and the formation moved with a precision that spoke of absolute coordination.
Admiral Chen joined me at the viewport. Impressive, isn't it?
Terrifying, I admitted. I'm grateful you are on our side.
She was quiet for a moment. For 400 years, we've watched the galaxy from the sidelines. We've seen empires rise and fall, wars fought over territory and resources, civilizations destroyed by enemies they should have been able to defeat. And we've stayed out of it, because getting involved would have meant revealing what we are.
And what are you?
Chen turned to face me, and in her eyes I saw something ancient and patient and utterly unyielding. We are the species that learn to survive at any cost. We are the descendants of people who clawed their way out of extinction again and again until survival became encoded in our very souls. We are the builders of fleets, the makers of weapons, the ones who will never, ever give up.
She looked back out at the fleet. We are humanity, and we have been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The transit took 3 days. When we emerged into Athrani space, we found a scene of devastation that made my hearts ache.
The system we entered had once been a thriving colony, home to 2 billion of my people. Now the planets were dark, their cities silent, their orbital stations drifting without power. Debris filled the space around them, the remains of ships that had tried to fight or to flee, and had failed at both.
I gripped the railing of the observation deck, struggling to maintain my composure. This had been a place I visited in my youth, a system I had written about in the Chronicle. Now it was a graveyard.
We're detecting energy signatures, a voice reported over the ship's communication system. Multiple contacts, bearing 274 by 182. Configuration matches the silence.
The fleet shifted around us, ships moving into combat formation with mechanical precision. Weapon systems powered up, shields activated, fighter bays prepared to launch. The Defiance's bridge, visible through a transparent partition at the end of the observation deck, became a hive of controlled activity.
And then, for the first time, I saw the enemy.
They emerged from the darkness between the dead planets, shapes that defied easy description. They were not ships in any conventional sense. They had no clear hulls, no visible engines, no weapons that I could identify. They were more like shadows given form, vast and wrong, moving in ways that violated my understanding of physics. There were hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. They filled the space ahead of us, an army of darkness that had consumed my civilization and now turned to face a new challenger.
All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Her voice rang through the fleet, calm and clear. You know what we're facing. You know what's at stake. Today, we fight for more than humanity. We fight for every civilization that has fallen to this enemy, every world that has been silenced, every life that has been lost. We fight to prove that the darkness can be pushed back.
The silence stretched, heavy with anticipation.
All ships engage.
What followed was unlike any battle I had ever witnessed or imagined. The human fleet did not advance in a single wave. Instead, it broke into dozens of smaller formations, each one operating independently while remaining part of a larger pattern. They struck the enemy from multiple angles simultaneously, weapons fire converging from directions the silence could not anticipate.
The enemy, the hollowing, the silence, whatever they truly were, fought back with terrifying power. Ships vanished in flashes of dark energy, their crews dying in an instant. Others were caught in fields that seemed to dissolve matter itself, their hulls disintegrating even as their crews struggled to escape. The losses were staggering.
But the humans did not retreat.
For every ship that fell, two more took its place. For every gap in the formation, another unit moved to fill it. The wounded vessels continued fighting until they could fight no more, and even then, their crews launched escape pods that the fleet paused to retrieve. They did not leave their people behind. They did not abandon anyone. Hours passed. The battle raged across a volume of space larger than some solar systems. The Defiance took hit after hit, its shields flickering, its hull groaning under the strain. Admiral Chen stood at the center of the bridge, issuing orders with the same calm she had shown in her office, as if the chaos around her was simply another problem to be solved.
And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn.
The Silence had never faced an enemy that would not break. They had relied on fear, on the psychological devastation of their inexorable advance, on the despair that paralyzed civilizations and made them easy prey. But fear did not work against humanity. They had faced extinction too many times. They had stared into the abyss and refused to flinch. The enemy formations began to fracture. The shadow shapes that had seemed invincible were destroyed one by one, their strange geometries torn apart by weapons fire and ramming attacks and tactics that should have been suicidal but somehow worked. The humans threw themselves at the darkness with a ferocity that bordered on madness, and the darkness could not withstand it.
By the time the battle ended, we had lost nearly 4,000 ships, but the enemy had lost more. The shadow shapes that remained were fleeing, their advance reversed, their aura of invincibility shattered.
The hollowing was not defeated, not yet, but for the first time in a decade, it was not winning. In the days that followed, I watched as the human fleet pressed its advantage. They did not pause to celebrate their victory. They did not even pause to mourn their dead. Not fully, not yet. There would be time for grief later. For now, there was only the mission. System by system, they pushed the silence back. Sometimes the battles were quick. More often, they were brutal, grinding affairs that consumed ships and lives by the dozens. But the humans never wavered. Every loss was answered with reinforcements. Every defeated unit was replaced by fresh reserves. The production lines back in Seoul never stopped running, and the stream of new ships seemed endless. I learned later that the initial battle group had been just the vanguard. Behind it, moving through transit points across human space, were another 30,000 ships. Behind them were more. Humanity had committed fully to this war, holding nothing back, transforming their entire civilization into a weapon aimed at the thing that had dared to threaten the galaxy. On the bridge of the Defiance, I asked Admiral Chen how long they could maintain such an effort.
As long as we need to, she said simply.
But the cost? The cost is worth it. She looked at me with those still, unreadable eyes. Your people looked at us and saw a minor species, weak and primitive, struggling to survive at the edge of civilization. You were wrong. But you were also right in a way. We are a species that struggles. That's what we do. That's what we're built for. When there's no struggle, we grow restless. When there's no enemy, we fight ourselves. It's our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. She turned back to the tactical display, where the latest battle was unfolding. The silence chose the wrong prey. They woke something that should have been left sleeping. And now they're going to learn what every enemy of humanity has learned, sooner or later.
What is that?
Chen smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. We don't stop. We don't give up. We don't surrender. We don't negotiate. We don't accept defeat. We fight until we win or until we're dead, and even death doesn't always stop us. Our history is written in the blood of enemies who thought they had beaten us, who celebrated their victory a moment too soon, who woke up to find us standing over them with weapons in our hands and hatred in our hearts.
She looked at me, and I saw in her eyes the accumulated weight of 1,000 years of struggle, 1,000 years of survival against impossible odds. We are the species that cannot be exterminated. The galaxy is about to remember why. It took 3 years to drive the silence from Ethrani space. 3 years of constant warfare, of battles that consumed thousands of ships and millions of lives, of advances and setbacks, and moments of despair that would have broken lesser peoples. The human fleet grew as it fought, production outpacing losses, new technologies developed and deployed in the field. They learned from every engagement, adapting their tactics, refining their weapons, becoming more effective with each passing month. By the end, the silence was in full retreat. The shadow shapes that had once seemed invincible were being hunted through the void, their numbers dwindling. Their advance not just halted, but reversed. The hollowing that had threatened to consume my civilization was being pushed back into the darkness from which it had emerged. I stood on the observation deck of the Defiance as we entered the system that had once been the throne world of the Ethrani Dominion. The planets were still dark, the cities still silent, the billions who had lived there still gone. But the enemy was gone too, driven out by human weapons and human blood and human will. Admiral Chen joined me, as she often did at moments like this. She looked older than she had 3 years ago. The war had aged her, as it had aged all of us. But there was something peaceful in her expression now, a satisfaction that came from a job well done. "It's not over," she said. "The silence is still out there. We'll need to pursue them, make sure they never threaten anyone again. But your space is clear. Your people can rebuild. I nodded, unable to speak. The emotions were too complex, too overwhelming. Grief for all we had lost, gratitude for what had been saved, shame for how we had misjudged our saviors.
I have a question for you, Ambassador, Chen said. Something I've been wondering since we first met.
Why did you come to us? You could have reached out to any of the great powers, the Vortal, the Krithani, the Consortium. You chose us. Why? I thought about it for a long moment, because Catherine told me that you survive. That was the word he used, survive. He meant it as an insult, I think, but when I heard it, I thought, that is what we need. Not wisdom, not power, not technology. We need a species that knows how to survive. Chen was quiet, absorbing this. And now? What do you think of us now? I turned from the viewport to face her fully. I think we were fools. For 400 years, we looked at humanity and saw a minor species, struggling on the edges, barely worth our attention. We measured you by our standards, by the elegance of your art, the sophistication of your philosophy, the beauty of your architecture. And by those standards, you fell short. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But we were measuring the wrong things. We were so focused on what you did not have that we failed to see what you did. You had strength that we could not imagine. Not the strength of conquest, but the strength of endurance. You had been forged in fires that would have destroyed us, and you had emerged not broken, but tempered, harder, more resilient. I looked back out at the fleet, at the thousands of ships that surrounded us, at the lights that pushed back the darkness. When we faced the hollowing, we crumbled. When you faced the silence, you fought. Not because you were stronger than us, you were not, but because you knew how to fight when the odds were against you, because you had been doing it your entire existence.
Chen nodded slowly. We're not better than you, Ambassador. We're not wiser, or more virtuous, or more deserving. We're just stubborn. Too stubborn to know when we're supposed to give up. Too stubborn to accept that some enemies can't be beaten. Too stubborn to lie down and die when the universe tells us we should.
And the galaxy is fortunate for that stubbornness, I said. The Athrani owe you a debt we can never repay. Not just for saving our civilization, for showing us what we had forgotten. That survival is not weakness, that struggle is not failure, that a species forged in fire can be stronger than one born in peace.
Chen smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. You'll rebuild. Your people are not as fragile as you think. You've just never been tested like this before. Now you have been, and you survived. That changes things. That changes everything.
She turned to leave, then paused. When you update the Chronicle, Ambassador, make sure you tell them everything, not just what we did, but why we did it. Not just our strength, but our weakness, our wars, our failures, our centuries of nearly destroying ourselves. Tell them that humanity is not a miracle or a monster. We're just a species that refused to die. And somehow that was enough. I watched her go. This small, tired woman who commanded fleets that dwarfed empires, who had saved a civilization that once mocked her ancestors, who carried the weight of human history in her eyes. And I began to compose in my mind the entry I would add to the Chronicle.
For 940 years, I have recorded the history of the Athrani Dominion. I have written of our triumphs and our tragedies, our wisdom and our folly, the long arc of our civilization across the stars. I believed I understood the galaxy,
understood the species that filled it, understood the forces that shaped the rise and fall of empires.
I was wrong. The story I must now tell is not about the Athrani. It is about a species we once dismissed as primitive, insignificant, barely worth our notice. It is about the humans of Earth, who watched us mock them for 4 centuries, who endured our condescension with quiet patience, who built their strength in secret while the galaxy laughed at their scarred ships and functional architecture. They mocked humanity, and then fleets vanished. Not human fleets, ours. Fleets of the Athrani, the Vordal, the Crethani, the countless civilizations that had risen and fallen across the Spidal Arm. We faced an enemy we could not defeat, an extinction we could not prevent, and we turned in our desperation to the species we had dismissed as vermin.
And they answered,
Not with demands or conditions, not with reminders of our arrogance, not with the gloating we deserved. They answered with fleets that darkened the stars, with warriors who did not know how to surrender, with a fury that burned the silence from our skies. They answered because helping was who they chose to be. They answered because, in the end, survival means nothing if it comes at the cost of your soul. Let this be recorded for all future generations. The Athrani Dominion owes its existence to humanity. Not to their technology, though it proved formidable. Not to their numbers, though they exceeded our imagination. To their spirit. To the unbreakable will that carried them through millennia of struggle, that forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. They are not the eldest species, nor the wisest, nor the most powerful by the measures we once used, but they are something more important. They are the species that would not die. They are the survivors. And they taught us in our darkest hour that we could be survivors too. I set down my stylus and looked out at the stars. They still did not care. They still burned cold and infinite, indifferent to the struggles of the tiny beings who lived in their light. But we were still here. The Athrani endured. And beside us, unassuming and patient and terrible in their quiet strength, stood humanity. The species that once mocked them had learned the truth at last, and the fleets that had vanished, the fleets of the silence, the shadow shapes that had consumed worlds, they had learned something too. They had learned that some prey cannot be hunted. They had learned that some species, when pushed to the brink, push back harder. They had learned, too late, the price of waking humanity from its chosen slumber. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, the remnants of the silence fled before an enemy they could not break, a species they could not understand, a rage they could not extinguish. Fled before humanity. Fled and did not stop. Because they had finally learned what the galaxy would never forget, that humanity is patient, and humanity is kind, and humanity forgives those who wronged them. But humanity never forgets. And humanity never stops. The stars do not care, but humanity does, and that, in the end, makes all the difference.